All right, today is our second grief episode. Last week we talked a lot with Ruby Chang and her experiences with grief, as well as the contents of her book about the same topic called Cage Momentum. Today we have lead pastor Lisa Surratt and fellow Seacoast staff Keenan Shriver, as they both have stories to tell concerning deep grief that they experience. We've got a lot to talk through about their experiences, how grief played out for them personally, how it doesn't completely go away, especially from a faith standpoint. These two talk very candidly also on ways we've got to learn how to face grief authentically. It's painful, and there's no easy outs. Before we talk to these two, Chip Judd, pastor and counselor here, shares a bit about grief from the scientific side of things. I had a handful of questions about that organ called the brain when it comes to this topic of grief. We'll start with Chip Judd, and then you'll hear me, Keenan, and Lisa. This will feel like listening in on a little small group meeting. I know I got a lot out of it, and I hope you do too. We thank you for listening. So 5 questions that I think we've already recorded the conversations with folks who have gone through grief, and some of the questions that popped in my head that I thought would be good to integrate into these episodes. One being, and I've heard some of this talk from you, Chip, is just how abrasive grief can be, and certain things that potentially people are surprised about when they're going through grief for the first time, or families of that person are going or seeing their family or friends suffering with grief, and they're just like, wow, I didn't know that. What are some things that you just don't know about grief until you've gone through it, like maybe misconceptions?
Yeah, even as you were framing the question, my mind kind of went to something pretty kind of obvious. Grief. Now we're talking real deal, lost loved one, tragic stuff. We're not talking
I didn't. We're talking worst case scenario, losing a child,
I didn't get the car I wanted or something. Yeah.
Right.
Well, here's the deal. I don't care what you say. Well, I'm prepared, You cannot prepare for something that you have no conception of. Well, nothing can compare you for your first bout with certain levels of grief. Now, here's the thing. Again, depending on your relationship to your parents and whatever, losing a parent at 90, way different than losing a child at 13 or a spouse. Well, I've already gone through losing my parents. Grief's the ultimate expression of lots of things. It's the ultimate expression of powerlessness. It's the ultimate expression of what do you really believe about life and eternity. And it takes you places that I'm trying to not sound weird here, but I don't care how much you think you've prepared. It's the most final event you'll ever deal with in your life. And I can remember, again, not losing anyone like spouse or kids, but losing friends, parents. And I can remember thoughts like, just that ambush you. You're kind of cruising along fairly well, and then something triggers you, and you think, now this side of heaven, I'm never going to see them again. I'm never going to lay eyes on them. I'm never going to have a hug, a conversation. Grief's a monster, man. And
I was asking my therapist some questions about grief she's just one person, but I value her perspective also. And I don't know how literally she meant this from a scientific perspective, but it sounded like science. She said that the first 6 months of grief, regardless of how someone acts or behaves, it's considered normal because of the grief. Like, in other words, how the person responds is one big question mark, and nobody is scratching their heads being like, why are they doing that? Why are they talking that way? Why are they behaving that way? The explanation is they're going through deep grief.
Right.
I thought that was pretty interesting.
I think it's always dangerous to compare. It's always dangerous to read a book on grief and then track yourself I'm at stage 3 or I'm here, or I'm there. There's no book is going to describe your journey. Now, general factors, parameters, yeah, but please don't, read a book on 5 stages of grief. And I think I'm in 2, but I'm transitioning. I mean, don't do that. And another thing I'd say, so I don't forget it, is to some degree, you're going to process grief the way you process everything. If you're a fast processor, you're going to try to fast process it. If you're a slow processor, you're going to try to slow process it. If you're not a processor, you're not going to process it. Now, that person, you need to find someone who'll make you occasionally. Again, you got to be careful. In other words, Joey came to me and wanted me to help him process grief. My caution is I can't make Joey process it at my speed, because I like to process stuff, kind of put it on the shelf and kind of deal with it, but not. I'm probably a fast processor when it comes to that.
But is there a time, and this is tracking with your thought, is there a time when, as someone who really cares about me, thinks Joey needs to make some movement here? Like, it's been 2 years. Like, is there ever a time that, as someone who does look after me and does care about my mental health, speaks in those terms of, Joey, man, you need to talk to more people, or you need to get out there? Like, is there a time when you're like, this is just unhealthy? Too slow?
Yeah. Several things come to mind, though. Number one, I like that you said the 2-year thing, because that would be a definite. If someone has not progressed in 2 years, we got a problem. Now, 2 months, 6 months, there should be changes in the grieving process over time. Now, what are they? How much? How fast? I don't know. But there should be changes. Here's an important thought. It's kind of what I said a minute ago. You're going to process grief the way you do everything else. Compare their behavior to before the tragedy happened. In other words, did you have to kind of nudge Joey to get out and interact in the first place? Always, forever. Well, then in the grieving process, it's probably going to be worse, but you're able to say, okay, this isn't that abnormal for Joey. Does that make sense? In other words, again, you're going to process grief with some similarities to how you've been processing life before the tragedy came. So you need to be someone who knows the person well enough to kind of make those kinds of comparisons.
Yeah, I love what you said a while ago, Chip. When you talked about not going and reading the 5 stages or whatever.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, grief is not linear.
No, that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
And the moment you think you're done with one stage, a month later, you're back there again, right? Like something hits that day, or something triggers that day. And so you're going to weave in and out of grief. And let's face it. And let me just ask you this. Do you ever fully stop grieving the loss of someone that you really love?
Yeah, let me say this, and I'm answering your question, and I think it'll make sense. What I've kind of evolved to is, I like to think like this: grief is a form of honor. When you grieve the loss of someone, you're honoring who and what they were to you. So yes, to what you're saying, my father. Does my father's value to me, has it diminished? He's been gone 20 years. No. But I don't grieve at the same level. But every once in a while, I might have a moment where I see something like right here where I live. It's half a mile walk down to the river. You were there just the other day, Roy. Well, there's times Colleen and I'll go for a walk, and we'll walk down there. And once a month, maybe, it'll hit me. My father would have loved this.
Yeah.
He would have loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even think of the word. My father would have gone pure crazy to know that I was living in a place like this, because he loved the water. He loved fishing. He loved whatever. So there's every once in a while and all it does is it brings, I wouldn't even call it a sense of loss anymore. Well, I mean, it's a sense of loss that I wish I could share the moment with him. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Now, we're talking about grief, so let's get back closer to the event. It's cruel. Again, it's a form of honor, so it's wonderful. I'm a little weird about this one. I don't think it's something to be run from or be in a hurry to end it. I think, again, it's a form of honor. It's a way of saying to that person, to God, to whoever, God, thank you for the time I had with this person. Thank you for the impact they had in my life.
It's
Thank
the price you pay for
years.
love.
Yeah.
I mean, when you say it's the price, if you're going to love, you're going to grieve.
That's great, Joey. That's great. We could drop the mic.
Well, I'll say this. I did a pretty decent job doing a funeral a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't say those words, but the guy who was in charge of the funeral home and leading everything, he came up to me and he said, "Man, you communicated so clearly that grief is the price for love." And so I was like, wow. But I didn't say that. You just nailed it, sir.
So you can translate that into this, Joey. If you don't want to ever grieve, don't love.
Yeah.
But if you want to love, you better get ready for some grief.
Yeah. It should. I mean, when you've loved well, it should hurt.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Or you're just in denial.
Yeah. I mean, I read something and it quoted, I'm going to butcher the quote a little bit, but it was something like, good marriages never end well. And what you understand what it means?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
Yeah.
And I said that to Colleen and she about got depressed. Somebody's got to say goodbye to somebody.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead, Joey. Go ahead.
Well, I just had a couple more questions, so go ahead.
All right. Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, let's remember that there will be people listening that have lost a child, that have in untimely ways, parent, spouse, sibling. And again, we're talking in kind of a little bit kind of frothy terms. That's probably not the right word, but there's no two ways about it. It's a gut punch, and it elicits, I would almost say, a sub-rational, and sub-rational is irrational. But I use the word sub because it's deeper than rational thinking. I mean, and what we try to do is alleviate the grieving by rational thinking. Does that make sense? We try to figure it out. Like you'll find people that have had an abrupt tragic event, and Christians are probably the worst at this. We want to explain it.
Yeah.
Well, God this, and probably this, and well, he probably was, and it's like, stop. Just stop.
Yeah.
Your head cannot touch what you're feeling. Don't try to rationalize your way through it. You're just going to I hate to say it, but it's a ride. You just kind of like when I was going into surgery. I think I may have said this. Everybody's excited. Oh, I'm going to get new lungs. You know what I'm thinking? I'm about to get my chest cut open. And I'm about to experience some pain. And so I was in a different place. And then afterwards, my kids are all excited. The surgery went great, whatever. And we're in celebration mode. I said, well, I'm not in celebration mode yet. I'm hurting. And so does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I don't care how empathic or empathetic you think you are. You cannot connect to what they're feeling. You cannot.
Yeah,
you can be there.
Even if you have experienced grief, because grief is going to be different for every person, because every
relationship was different. Right. Just take your statement. Grief's the cost of love. Your love's different. Your love's different for different people. Your grief's going to be different for different people. So don't play those games like, oh, I know exactly what you're feeling. When somebody says that, I want to poke them in the eye and say, shut up.
Yeah. So like I said, I asked my therapist a bunch of questions on grief today, and she pointed out something that I just thought was like, wow, I did not think of that, or I actually didn't know. But you go back in time, and I think it stems or the roots are in Europe, but then it was like this in America too, where it was just accepted that when a woman lost her husband and became a widow, you just assume she's going to be far from 100% for a whole year. Now, obviously, that was a different era where she typically wasn't working, but she would wear all black, and everybody knew she is in mourning. She's not 100%. Right. She's not acting normal. You can't expect the same things. A year, and now I think the standard is you get 3 days off, regardless of what your loss is. That's the allotment.
Yeah.
I think we may have done grief better back in the day. How would you caution someone who really cares about their loved one? They don't understand grief and they want to be helpful. Is there ever a time where someone who's not a therapist and not an expert with this kind of stuff should nudge the person in a way of, come on, you got to take some steps forward. You got to go see a therapist. I'm trying to encourage you to do something because you've been stuck for so long. Like, would you just say practice caution regardless if you really don't know what you're saying?
I would say.
And Chip, I'll give you an example. I know a couple who are grieving the loss of their child. It has been a very long time, but early on in the process, their own family, it just got to a point where they were too uncomfortable to be around. Like their family was uncomfortable to be around their family who was grieving because they wanted the grieving parents to snap out of it. Hey, we're together for the holidays. Come on, y'all. Like don't bring this down. We're celebrating here. Right. So it's almost like we want you guys around if you fit within the vibe of what we're doing, which I don't find a loving attitude to somebody that you say you love and care about.
Well, and that's part of what makes the grieving process complicated. The people around us create conditions and environments. We react to them, they react to us. It causes trauma in our relationships. Imagine that family just said, well, we don't want to be around you. Well, now you just traumatized them again. Now, to your basic question, I would say I've seen the, you got to move on, used way more than used well.
That makes sense, yeah.
I mean, way, I'm talking like 10 to 1. But here's the problem. It's rooted in selfishness, not love. I want you to move on so I can have fun with you again. Or you're pleasant to be around. In other words, rarely is it being done from a posture of, this is not healthy for you, blah, blah, blah. Number one, you don't know. So how would I answer the question, yes or no? I would say assume it's not right. Again, you got the before and after the event, whatever it is. Like if you know that person and you got a pretty good history with them, you would be able, let's just say they tend to let things drag. Well, then you're allowed to kind of have that in the filter as you watch them for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's always good to try to use questions because questions make them come up with answers. And it's, hey, how do you feel like your activity level is? Now, they may be sharp enough to know what you're doing, but you're not doing it. You're not in their face saying, get off your butt. They know you're watching them and you care enough to say, hey, how are you eating? You eating? Okay. But I guess what's buried in my answer, Joey, is be really, really careful with that. Because 9 times out of 10, it's selfishly motivated. It really is. And you got to be careful with that. Yeah. So what you could do is refer to a professional. I think everybody that experiences significant trauma should see a counselor. I don't mean every week necessarily, maybe, because you just need someone up on the outside to tell you you're connecting the dots correctly. Yeah. Because you won't. You'll connect this to this, and it'll make sense to you. Oh yeah, these two are connected. A therapist can help you say, you're really that's not connected. That's connected to this, not that. And there's a lot of growth opportunity buried in grief. Yeah. Not in the first few months.
Yeah. Well, my last question.
Excuse me, let me finish this thought. A lot of times, Joey, grieving for someone, and don't take this too far, anybody. Grieving eventually translates into you really discovering the unhealthiness of the relationship.
Interesting, yeah.
Which only adds to the grief.
Most of the time, probably. Unless someone like us that talk this way, think this way, can help them see a growth opportunity in it.
I mean, if I understand what you're saying, if I understood that comment correctly, because I was thinking about this earlier, the level with which or the way in which people grieve, I mean, there's so many variables, but part of it is is the nature of their relationship with the person that they've lost.
Absolutely.
And so when they have lost someone that things weren't well, and that there were things left unsaid, or that there were regret, that makes the grief even I hate to say, worse, or just different. It's a different type of grief when you're grieving those things.
Well, that's kind of what I meant a minute ago. Why you need to talk to a therapist. You may think what you're feeling is this mountain of grief over the loss of this person. When you talk to somebody, you find out some of it is regret over a conversation you wished you had. Now, that's not grief in its purest form. That's regret, not grief. Those are two different things. So you're going to need help figuring that out. Like, one of the reasons my dad's passing was it was joyous. Number one, I prayed with him to receive the Lord. And number two, our relationship was not where it could have been ever, but it was on the incline. And we were having better moments and some really cool ones. And, but still, I still regret that I didn't have the relationship with my dad that a son should. But I know he did the best he could. Yeah. But you're right. And I don't know that I ever thought that before. That simple thing of one of the differentiations you got to make is from grief and what did I say?
Regret.
Because those two will sneak together real fast. Fast.
Welcome to the Seacoast podcast. And we're going to be smiling and laughing for maybe the first 2 minutes. We're here with our second recording on grief, and we're here with Keenan Shriver. That's your last name, right?
It is.
And Pastor Lisa Surratt, and you guys have a little bit of a history.
We do.
Yeah,
a long history.
Yeah, we'll get into that here in a second. This is going to feel almost like a small group. We've never been in a small group before, but it's going to feel like it. And I thought that we would open up with a couple of verses as to why we're having these heavier conversations on grief. And one thing we were just talking, Lisa, before I share these two verses, it seems like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, you and Pastor Josh started making a literal part of our vision statement. It felt like helping hurting people. Like it was something, I think it was one of our goals. It may be our permanent goal. You know?
Absolutely.
How did that birth? I mean, because we've always, as a church, cared about hurting people in pain, but saying it constantly, it really keeps things on the forefront. It's a good reminder of what we're here for.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Josh and I never aspire to the roles that we play right now, but God has kind of taken us on this journey. I think about years ago, I loved my background's in medicine and loved doing medical missions all over the place, and my goal was to go and help hurting people that didn't have access to medical care. People that needed Jesus and just had never heard good news. And so, when we were called to this position, it almost felt like, wait, that wasn't my plan. I planned to help people, in Africa or anywhere. It just seemed like everyone here had what they needed. They had access to the gospel. They have access to medical care. Like, how can we help people? Well, really over time, God has revealed that while there are so many people here, really in the United States, but particularly in Mount Pleasant and, Charleston area, people have a lot of things. They have a lot of what they quote unquote need. But they are hurting desperately in a different way. And really, ultimately, what they need is healing from a lot of, and I say what they need, what a lot of people are desperate for is healing relationally, healing spiritually. The need looks different, but there is still such great need. And oftentimes I feel like the Lord reminds me, like, it is sometimes harder to reach people who have everything that they could possibly want or need, But then to see how the need is great. The need is great. There's so many people who are hurting. And during that time, we lost Pastor Darren Patrick, who was just really struggling. So mental health and we've talked about your journey. Mental health has become such an important part of our ministry, which is why we started the counseling center. And so yeah, I mean, helping hurting people is a big deal to us.
Yeah. And you guys both have some stories that y'all are going to share with involving grief. Two scriptures I wanted to bring up. One is one that we've heard a lot surrounding this subject. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies, the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our afflictions, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. That's like a KJV or something like that. But here's one of my favorites, and I think we overlook this in conversations like this. When Paul is talking about his thorn, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. It's almost like it activates Christ's power on us when we talk openly about heaviness and weaknesses and things that we struggle through. I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities, for when I'm weak, then I am strong. So I asked you, Keenan, when we first saw each other this morning, I wasn't sure how many kids you have. You have 3, right?
Yeah.
And their ages?
1, 3, and 5.
1, 3, and 5. And then tell me, I know relatively the ages of your kids, but
11, 15, and 17.
yeah. All right. And then 18, 16, 14, 12. I thought that, so I've been close to 2 moms who have lost a child, and neither of them, wanted to have like a full conversation. I find it kind of hard to find parents who want to be in that sort of subject area. But I will tell you guys that it's probably one of them, Val Jones, administrator of the JI campus for years. I worked with her. She lost her son. And I'm telling you, and I've told her this way after the fact, that seeing and hearing her see her son for the first time after he had passed away is the worst experience I've ever, because I know her and I love her, and I'm literally hearing and seeing her mourn her son. And then we had a tragedy when we were on James Island, as Seacoast James Island campus. One of our guitarists in the worship band, he was also working with our students, got in a motorcycle accident and passed away. And Priscilla and I got really close we knew him and were relatively close to him, but we got really close to his parents. And so I asked Miss Val Jones and Miss Darlene Rash to just basically write their thoughts, their feelings when they reflect on that. Miss Val said, I don't feel like we lost our son because we know where he is. I do feel like there is a missing piece in my life now. Sometimes the pain that comes from thinking about this missing piece takes my breath away. Tears flow, and I just keep trying to catch my breath until the Lord tells me, remember, he is with me and it's okay. This happens more times than I can count. So I take one day at a time, learning to live with missing him until I see him again. And then Darlene said, losing a child is not something that life prepares us for. It's unnatural. It's never expected. It's now been 8 years since we lost our only child, Bronson. Soon after I realized that the person I was died Soon after, I realized that the person I was died with him. I was left with remnants of the person I used to be. Not only did I lose him, but I also lost a huge chunk of myself, because he is and will always be a part of me. The same has been true for Bronson's dad. My husband, Art, also became unrecognizable. Most days it feels like there is a battle taking place on the inside of my body. This is the turmoil caused by grief. The grief associated with losing Bronson is something I now know that is not something I now know that I will never get over it. About 6 years ago, I decided that I had to learn how to embrace my grief and give it a space where it could exist. As I began doing this little by little, I felt like the war inside my body subsided some. The more I practiced this, I began to feel like I was no longer raging against my inner self. Unfortunately, polite society does not allow a place for grief. For a short period of time, people can tolerate your tears or allow you to go down memory lane, talk about your lost loved one. Unfortunately, if doing this you become emotional, then all of a sudden your behavior is unacceptable. In the end, what happens is your circle becomes very small. Most people are not able to handle their own emotions, so handling yours is totally out of the question. You see, remembering Bronson can be painful, but it can also be a part of the healing. Not remembering him means that I have to choose to forget him, which means that I have to give up some part of loving him, and I refuse to do that. He is worth remembering, and he is worth the tears that comes from remembering him, the bittersweet. And if we cry, it's okay. I have learned how to give myself grace. I also become unapologetic. Many people try to help by encouraging me to get busy, go back to work, go back to life, get your mind on other things, except what you don't get is that our life, as we knew it, was gone when he left. He was a huge part of our today and our tomorrow. Unless you have stood in someone's shoes, you really don't have a perspective from which you can understand the loss of a child. It can't be compared to any of the other losses that we suffer naturally in life. I have also learned to give others grace for their inability to fully comprehend the magnitude of the loss. And then wrapping it up, there are friends who swoop in the midst of a tragedy. They're the firefighters. They rally and arrange meals and work to meet immediate needs. There are usually plenty of them. Then there are the rebuilders. They're in it for the long haul. There won't be as many of them, but their friendship and support will help hold you up for the long term. Those relationships are so, so precious. Pain that the three of us do not ever want to experience.
No.
And before we get into y'all's story, I mean, it's not something that I think anybody would encourage any of us to dwell on, because it's not something that we can really prevent as our kids get older. I mean, it's just things happen. But with the depths of grief that y'all have experienced, I mean, in your head, especially as mothers, do y'all think, yes, that is a whole different category of
100%.
grief? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because y'all can say that with authority, because you have experienced really deep grief.
Yeah.
But then comparing that to losing a child, it does. Like as a father, I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything that can compare to that.
Yeah.
Certainly greatest fear for sure.
Yeah. All right. So let's turn a quick corner and have some fun, and y'all tell me about y'all's relationship, and then we'll get into y'all's stories, and I'm going to inundate y'all with questions on grief.
Joey, I just have a quick request that perhaps we could maybe talk some lighter topics during some of our, future podcasts.
Sure, you got it.
Well,
let me say this. Weren't you a babysitter for a while?
Yes.
my very first babysitter.
Very first babysitter,
Yes.
so of Miles.
Yes.
So Miles, 17 now. He was 4 months old. And I got connected with Josh and Lisa to babysit. And I remember...
How'd you get connected?
So my mom worked at the church at the time. Okay. And they were looking for a babysitter. And she volunteered me.
What's your mom's first name?
Mary.
Okay.
And so I was terrified because I was like, I can't go babysit for the Surratt family, the pastors, the leaders of our church. And because I was 17.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to babysit, and the rest is truly history.
What's crazy is that we're about to tip the, the seesaw of how long we have because she was 17. Miles is now 17, so we will have been together longer than we haven't been.
Wow.
Very
Did you ever
soon.
live in? Or did you ever?
Yes, I lived with them
Not once.
twice.
Twice, yeah.
Twice.
I lived with them as a single, and I lived with them, me, my husband Joe, and our 3-month-old baby moved in with them.
Now, let me give a little story behind
Yeah.
that, because that might seem weird to some people. So Keenan was a live-in nanny for us, which was, I don't know if I could have survived those years without Keenan. And I could literally go on forever and ever about how God just like really crossed our paths. And I mean, we instantly hit it off. We would come home from a date night and sit on the couch for until like 1 a.m.
Hours.
Just talking, which was really so sweet. It just became sort of this mentoring relationship. And she would come home from college, and oftentimes her family would get mad at her because she'd come straight to my house because she loved the kids so much. And has had incredible influence in our family. So I'm forever grateful. So backing up a little bit, so Josh and I, when we were married, young, super, super young, we got married at 20 and 21, and we decided we wanted to move to Chicago. And so we decided we were going to move in. We moved in with Greg and Debbie to save money for the purpose of being able to move to Chicago. And thank God we went to Chicago in April, and it was so unbelievably cold that we were like, we can't do this.
Yeah, especially in April. You're like,
Right. We're not
Yeah.
even in January. But because we had been saving so much money and not having any bills, we were able to put a down payment on a house. And so we always said, gosh, if God ever gives us the ability to do what Greg and Debbie did for us, and let us come live, with them so that we could save the money, it made such a big difference in our financial life. And so when Keenan, we loved, having Keenan live with us, and we loved Joe. He was like an instant like family member also. And so when they got married, I told Keenan, I was like, listen, get married, and then just move back in. It's great. And so she came to me and said, were you actually serious? And I was like, yes, I was serious. Like, we would love to be able to, help you guys get your first house. And so they did. So they moved in, and we had so much fun.
So much fun. We were there for 1.5 years. And I feel like for Joe, it was more so to save money for a house. And for me, it actually is a part of our grief story, because a few months before, my mother-in-law, Joe's mom, Tammy, had passed away. And we had a baby 5 weeks before she passed away. And this was like new territory for me. And so for me, it felt like a safe place to move in with them and like be surrounded by people and not be on our own and kind of navigate being a new mom, but also this new grief that we had, never experienced before. So,
Which was really a roller coaster for you guys, because you had the joy of having a new baby,
yeah.
and yet deep, deep grief.
Yeah.
And so it was a tricky, tough season.
It was super challenging, and it was scary because I didn't know, like, are we ever going to be okay? Are we ever going to be the same again?
Yeah.
And what I'm so grateful for in that time, we lived there for 1.5 years, and it was actually, we were there during the pandemic. And so we would have fun and play spike ball until midnight. And
Put the kids to bed, and then the four of us would hang out.
Sit around the table and be able to like share honestly about, what was going on and how we were feeling and how we were doing. And so it was the greatest gift, way beyond being able to save for a down payment for a house.
Yeah. And tell listeners what you do here.
So I work for Pastors Josh and Lisa as their executive assistant. And then I also oversee culture.
Yeah.
Staff culture. So Keenan is just a ninja. Honestly, we are so blessed that we had the relationship. And actually, I remember when we were looking for an EA, like we were trying to figure out, okay, who would be the right fit. And I remember Keenan coming to me and saying, like, how'd you feel about me like applying for this job? And I was like, are you serious?
Yeah.
But it has been the most, honestly, I was a little nervous just because of how deep our friendship was, that I just was like, gosh, I don't want to make this complicated. And it has been how many years?
Almost 11 that I've been on staff.
It has been the most beautiful. She knows us, she knows our voice, she knows our heart. And God has just gifted her incredibly to be able to do what she does, like so well. We're so grateful.
Well, good to have you on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yes, first time.
Yeah. Lisa's well acquainted with this place. In fact, we were just sitting here yesterday.
That's right.
Why don't you guys go into as much of your stories of grief as you'd like? As many details you want to share, and then I have a lot of follow-up questions. So we can start with you, Keenan.
Yeah, so...
Thank you, by the way, because I know this is not easy.
Yeah.
This is not easy conversation.
It's a little vulnerable, but I do hope that some things that come with grief can be normalized. I know a lot of my experience, I felt like, am I crazy for feeling this way or thinking this way? But I had a couple of losses like growing up, of family and close friends, but really in 2018 it is when it started, this like grief journey of 6 years, that we just kept experiencing loss after loss. Like I mentioned, my mother-in-law Tammy, she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2018, and then a few months later, we lost our first baby early in pregnancy. And then the following year, so they had given Tammy 6 to 12 months to live. She actually fought and lived for 16 months. She got to meet our first baby. She got to snuggle him for about 5 weeks before she passed away. And then really the next 2 years were just so incredibly hard. And I thought I understood, what my husband was going through, having lost his mom. But in 2021, we lost my dad. He got COVID, and he and my mom actually got COVID and ended up in the hospital, and he was in the MICU for 4 weeks, and then he passed away. And thankfully, my mom, after being in the hospital for about a week, she was released and went home and started her recovery. But
emotional and physical.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And so then my dad passed away, and he was my best friend. I always say, like, I have the best God, like my best heavenly father gave me the most amazing earthly father. And it really felt like my foundation was just ripped out from under me because of how close we were and how much he instilled in me and how much he gave for our family and to our family. And when we lost him, we had actually just lost my grandmother 3 weeks earlier, and I was 5 months pregnant. And so that was really challenging and complicated, and holding this paradox of life and death has kind of been like this theme over the past few years. And
I want to just mention, so I've never been pregnant before. You guys could attest to the fact that you're dealing with an enormous amount of like hormones and stuff, right?
Oh,
going
for sure,
through
of
that
course.
at 5 months pregnant.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And at that time during COVID, so during the pandemic, it was 2021, and women who were pregnant were actually dying from getting COVID and what was going around. And so here I am, like double masking, protecting like as much as I could to like go in and sit beside my dad because I didn't know what was going to happen. And it was incredibly traumatic. I believed that he was going to be healed to live. And that like Joe and I made plans that he was going to move in. He and my mom were going to have to move into our house downstairs in our bedroom. And, we're making all these plans because we knew it would be a long road to recover for both of them. And then he passed away. And I was so lost and broken. And I think that it was in those first few weeks that I looked at Joe and I said, I am so sorry because I thought I understood what you were going through when you lost your mom. And I loved Tammy and we were really close. Right. But I said, I'm sorry because I had no idea what it was like to lose a parent. And so really for the next 2 years, it was hard work and deep grief and bringing another baby into the world and then having another loss early in pregnancy. And then, we really felt like we had gotten to a point where we were almost like out of the woods. Like we had been walking through these deep, dark woods for several years and we got to this like clearing. And then last year, so 2024, on my baby's first birthday, I got a call that my older brother had suddenly passed away. And so it just felt like, here we go again. Yeah. So our families have experienced some just incredible loss. And, at the same time, these lives that are being born and coming into our world and navigating this heaviness of broken hearts, but also like the joy that children bring. And it's been the hardest thing we have ever done in our lives, for sure.
Yeah. Wow. So a year removed, would you say you are out of the heaviest season of grief with your brother or still in it? And I want both of y'all to feel free to correct any of my wording or say, you probably shouldn't say things that way. I've been around people grieving, and so I've learned a lot, but I still may say something stupid, Keenan.
Yeah, no, listen, I get it. I understand. And it's like, you just don't, like words really matter in grief.
Because you don't get over it.
Right. No, you don't get over it. And for me, like, my opinion is like the grief will always be with me. There will always be the loss of these people. And it's okay, what am I going to do with that? Am I going to sit in it? Am I going to grow from it? Because one way or the other, I've got it's with me. But it's, what is this month? We're in February and we just lost my brother in October. So it's still very fresh and still processing it. I'm in counseling with the counseling center here at Seacoast. And, we're experiencing all the firsts of him not being here. And we're still in the heavy part of it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I apologize that I didn't realize it was this fresh. And I'm also amazed at your willingness to sit here 4 months removed. I mean, seriously.
Well, maybe that answers why I was so nervous this morning.
Yeah.
But also, like, in some ways, it's like, every loss is different, of course. But I feel like this is kind of what we've been doing for years now. And as hard as it is, like, I've learned that there is hope. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. And so I hope that I can communicate that today. I think that's like the most important thing, is that there is hope. There's a light. There's a future.
Yeah. Real quick before we hear Lisa's story, and then I want to ask y'all a bunch of questions. Did you ever struggle with like being mad at God? Like, look, we went through a lot already. Why again?
For sure. Yes. I've had anger with God and, just confusion, not understanding. I still don't understand, though. I don't have answers as to why. And I know people say, and it's like well-meaning people say, well, God's going to use this and there's purpose in this. And I'm like, I'm sure I believe that because I do believe our God is good. I believe he can handle my anger and frustration. And so I think it's important to express that to him. But like if I could go back, I would change it all still. And so I think that that's something that like, again, it's just well-meaning people just trying to encourage you, but it's like, don't tell me something that isn't actually helpful, even though you're trying to be helpful.
I feel like you almost need to be invited in by the person grieving to give encouragement.
Yeah.
Like if it's not invited or even ask permission, hey, I know you're grieving. I have something that I want to say that's more on the positive. Is that okay? Just ask permission sort of
or
thing.
Or even how did Bronson's mom say it with the crew that's like with you for the long haul? It's those people. It's Josh and Lisa. It was our small group. The people that are walking with us that it's like, okay, you can say the honest, the hard things to me because you're with me in this every single day.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I knowing these families personally, I know that, I'm thinking they lost a child, and I'm going to guess a year later, some people that were close to them were frustrated that they couldn't just hang out with their friends like they used to. And I'm like, they lost a child, man.
Yeah.
I think, too, a lot of people don't know how to be.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I know.
Lisa always forcing us to offer grace to people.
It is reality though. Like, we've walked a lot of people through really hard things, and there isn't anything you can say.
Yeah.
It's really just about being there. I don't know. I think sometimes people just feel lost, like they don't really know is it time? Do I try to offer encouragement? Do I try to get their mind off of it? Or like, where are we? And I think that's the like thing though, when you love somebody who is walking through really, really deep grief, just knowing that like your job is not to say the things. Your job is literally just to be there, and they're going to give you the cues.
Yeah.
If they are feeling like I got to get my mind off this, they're going to tell you. They're going to be like, "Hey, can we just go get coffee? Can we go shopping? Can we go for a walk?" They're going to give you the cues of what to do. Other times, and it's hard. It is really, really hard to just come and just sit and feel, because you want to help. You want to figure out. And I remember coming to Keenan's house and just being like, I'm just going to do your laundry or I'm just going to bring some food, or I'm just going to, and literally just, being there, changing the baby's diaper, taking whatever load you can off of the people that you love and just loving on them, caring for them. Your words aren't going to fix anything.
Those were the biggest blessings to me. The laundry, the things I probably didn't even realize in the moment.
Yeah.
That you were doing and others
you
were
can't
doing.
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't. You're so overwhelmed with grief that like all of the normal day-to-day, it's a miracle if you just brush your teeth.
Yeah.
You're just in such a state of like, desperation of like God can, and I think about grief as like, man, I would rather go through all the physical, put me in the hospital, make me super sick physically. I would rather go through that than deep grief, because you realize there's no medicine that can fix it. There's no vacation or place that you can run to. You can go to Hawaii and sit in the most gorgeous place in the whole wide world, and there is no escaping that pain. There's no escaping.
Did the joys of bringing children into the world mitigate the pain, or did they just coexist?
They just
It's just
coexisted.
as painful and just as joyous.
They coexisted, and it's the craziest thing to look at my kids. So all three of my kids, Joe and I, neither of us have blue eyes. My dad had blue eyes. Joe's mom had blue eyes. The only two people in our families that had blue eyes. All three of my kids have blue eyes. So I look at them, and they bring me incredible joy and incredible sorrow at the same time, because I feel like I'm looking at Tammy and Brian. I'm looking at their legacy, which, again, it makes me so proud, but it makes me so incredibly sad that they're not here to see it. So it's definitely a coexisting.
Yeah.
It didn't, unfortunately, take away any of the pain. But I would also say, like, just like any other mom having a child, like, it is the greatest joy. Like, the pain doesn't take away any of the joy. Like, I still feel like I have the same amount of joy and pride in my kids as any other mom would.
Is there ever a time in which somebody praying for you and for your grief to be lessened, is that ever a good prayer?
I mean, I think the prayers that have meant the most to me are, God, make yourself, like, reveal yourself. Be so near, bring comfort, bring peace, and not, like, take away the grief, because ain't nothing going to take away the grief.
And peace alongside the grief, not replacing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so I don't think God didn't intend for us to experience death. And so I think that's a big part of why it's so hard and complicated to grieve. But, like, once you have lost someone, how I feel is, it's just always going to be with me. It will always be a loss. And so if someone's praying that, I don't think it's not going to make it go away. So
Yeah. And it's not helpful that God needed another angel or anything. I'm kind of, I don't know anybody that says that, so I'm making fun of them right now. Don't tell people that God just gained an angel. These are the craziest sentiments.
Because God doesn't need anything from us.
And that would make you mad. Like, let me have my brother right now.
Right.
You're God. You have everything.
Well, and, like, the Bible says, like, one day we're going to judge the angels. And so I'm like, I feel like that doesn't, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't line up. It doesn't add up. So,
but grace
doesn't
for
help.
people. They're just trying. They're just trying.
People
to
don't know what to say, so sometimes they say dumb things.
I've said them too.
Same.
Too.
And so have I.
Yeah.
And you don't know until you're going through it.
Mm-hmm.
And the heart behind it is, like, they just want to, help you feel better somehow, some way.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's no.
In my experience, and it may just be the quality of people that I surround myself with, but usually people who experience deep grief have an incredible amount of grace and patience for people for saying dumb things. Because I think it's just like, I know these people. They love me.
Yes.
They don't want harm. They want to build me up. They just don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Your toughest season of grief, I would imagine, is your sister.
I would say, my sister, and so we had a family friend also that passed away very unexpectedly, and he was like a second dad to me. I grew up with their family. Every single day after school, I was at their house, went on trips together. He taught me lots of different things. Between rollerblading, how to ski, kneeboard, everything. We went whitewater rafting, lots and lots and lots of memories together. But yeah, honestly, that's the other thing is grief is so complex that my grief with my sister is very different than my grief with Robbie. And I think that's probably true for all grief, is that we were talking about this the other day, Keenan, what she said made so much sense. Like, my relationship with my sister is so different than my sister's. I have another sister. My other sister and my brother's relationship with my sister. My relationship with Robbie was so different and so your relationship with that person is yours and it's very unique to you. So your,
which is why offering advice to that person, oh, I've lost a mom, I know how you feel. Maybe not.
Right.
You may
Yeah.
not know how that, you probably
Right.
don't. It's a different mom, a different relationship.
exactly. So, with my sister, it's just interesting how our bodies, our minds, even what stage of life you're in, there's so many factors that really go into how you respond to grief. For me, with my sister, I was 19 years old, and I'll never forget the day. My sister called me, and she just very sort of abruptly said, "Andrea's dead." And I'll never forget that stab in my heart of what? And basically my sister worked for a doctor who had offices in both Michigan and in Florida. And they would travel back and forth. They would work a week here and a week there. It was Labor Day weekend. They were coming home and wanted to get home early. The physician that she worked for, he was not a good person. He was also a pilot in training, had a pilot in the plane, but the pilot was not flying. From what we got from the black box, he made a decision to skip their refueling stop in Atlanta, did the calculations, thought we can make it no problem, which they should have, but had a malfunction in the plane, called for an emergency landing in Boca Raton, and did not make it, missed the runway by about 1,000 feet. They clipped a building, hit some some power lines, and there were no survivors. And so it was all so tragic. My sister was 31 and had a 10-month-old baby, was married to the love of her life. He still has never remarried. He loved her so much. And so it was really just such a shock. And at the time, so because of our age gap, we were 12 years apart, we never really lived together. It was a complicated, my family's very complicated also. Both my parents were married before they got married, so she was my half-sister, my dad's daughter, and so, things are very complicated already. The beautiful, thing about how God works is God did do some miracles through it, even though we would take her back in a moment. But God has used it for good, has brought deeper, greater relationship, a lot of healing in my family. Even my dad and mom and his ex-wife and her husband really, through all of this, have been you know what? Life is too short. We're going to bury the hatchet. We're going to forgive each other. And we are going to raise this grandbaby. We're going to be there for our family. And so they see each other all the time. They get along great. And my sister and I had a lot of, the grief for my sister was unimaginable just because they were best friends. I mean, they were so, so close. But my response being 19, I went into just overdrive. We need to book flights. We need to, I just went into doing all the things. And I got really busy. I kind of ran from grief. I didn't really know how to process it. I remember sobbing when I first got the call and then not crying again until weeks after the funeral. Even during the funeral, just not crying. Being so intensely sad, but paying attention to everyone. I felt like my grief wasn't as deep as some other people, so it felt selfish for me to cry. I don't know. I felt like I needed to be caring for people. And weeks after we got home and, all the things settle down, that's when like things get really, really hard because, all the family and friends, everybody goes home, things, people aren't bringing food, people aren't, showing up as much, and and that's part of it. Like that's normal. But that is when things get quiet, things get intense.
Yeah. I had a friend who recently lost his mom, and he was telling me at lunch that he literally felt abandoned. And he knew nobody did that on purpose, but he was just like, where did everybody go?
Yes. Yes, that's real. And I remember I was taking way too many classes. I was working almost full time. I was really trying to just like keep myself busy. And I remember coming home from work one day and just having this wave of grief that I had to pull over because I was just hysterical. And it felt so out of the blue, like I had been able to control my emotions until, that whole idea of like the body keeps score, like my body needed to grieve. I like needed to physically let myself grieve, and I had not. I had just been running from it. And I remember calling my dad and I could barely talk, and he was like, "Where are you?" And so I just remember very vividly him coming and meeting me in a parking lot and us sitting and crying and just being, and processing.
I heard on a podcast recently, they were talking about grief, and they said the energy that the brain has to spend on the tumultuous process of readjusting and recalibrating that person's not here. They said it's exhausting because your brain is having to, I remember my grandma, and when grandpa passed away, I thought she was being like poetic and figurative. And I was like, you mean that for real? She was like, yes. Like she said, almost every day, or she didn't say almost every day. She said, sometimes I expect him to walk through the door, and then I have to be like, oh, he's gone. And I'm like, you really think that he's coming through? She's like, yes, sometimes I.
I told Lisa the other day I was driving and I saw a car drive by and I could have sworn it was my dad. Yeah. And so I'm speeding up, like trying to get next to him because I'm convinced for a few seconds I just saw my dad. And it obviously was not him. But your brain thinks a certain way. And I feel like for like 6 years, I've just been exhausted. So just speaking to that, like I just have been tired no matter how much sleep I get and how I'm taking care of my body and all of that. Like it is so exhausting. It's so true.
Yeah. Have you guys found yourself stumbling into why questions?
Oh, always.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, Josh and I are talking about this. I mean, he just recently lost his uncle. And, there are losses where, like with my sister, I could be really angry with the doctor and the pilot. I could place blame. With this loss, this was just a sudden medical emergency that took him, which, is, I think the thing that Josh has been wrestling with is like, God, that was up to you. Ultimately, you could save him. And so, of course, you just wrestle with the why? Why would you take a father and a husband and why would you do that?
You too. Why?
Yeah. And I think it's I just want to know that there's purpose in all of this pain that I'm left with. and feeling and what it means for us for, the rest of our lives that they're not here. I just want to understand it. And unfortunately, it's not really ours to understand necessarily, but I definitely ask, still to this day about Tammy, my dad, my brother, the babies that we lost, all of it. Just wanting there to be a purpose in all of the pain.
So this may be a silly question, maybe kind of personal too. Would you say that depression marked any of this season, even if it was like a situational deal? Like, would you say I've been depressed over this?
Yeah, for me, after I lost my dad, I started counseling almost immediately, and something that my counselor told me is that symptoms of grief and depression are very similar. It can look the same, but then after I had Ruth, our 3-year-old, a few months after my dad had passed away, I actually ended up going on an antidepressant because it felt too weighty to carry. And so it was
Did you respond to it? Like, was it helpful?
Yes, it was helpful for about a year. And then I actually weaned off the medication and did well getting off of it. And so it felt like situational for me in that season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Both of you, were there times when you sought God in desperation and you felt like it was falling on deaf ears? Like, the psalmist, God, where are you? Why are you hiding your face from me? Were there ever times when you were just like, God, I need to hear from you. I need your presence. No answer?
I would say, I remember, with Robbie, he had a heart attack, and we had found out that he had had a heart attack, and we did not know if he was going to make it or not. And just desperately crying out to God, like, please save him, please, like, we cannot lose him. And just feeling so like, did you not hear me? Did you not hear like my desperate cries? And same for, when Keenan's dad was in the hospital. I mean, we are all just praying, like, and just in disbelief that God would not hear our prayers and answer them. And ultimately, it boils down, this is where the rubber meets the road of like, do you trust God or don't you? Because, trusting God doesn't mean he's going to answer the way you want him to.
Yeah.
Trusting God means he's sovereign no matter what.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it less painful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think when some people say I trust God, what they are saying, and it can be disastrous, is I trust God to do what my heart's desire is. Like, well, of course I trust God, he's going to save him.
Yeah.
Of course I trust God, my mom's going to be okay.
Right.
It's like, no, do you trust God? Period.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
The flip side of that question, I have heard people that were in deep grief, brothers and sisters in the Lord, and they all comment on there is an element of unexpected comfort and presence that has met me in the depths of despair, that I didn't have that level, like that kind of comfort I never experienced until I was in that depths of pain. And I've thought before, like, there's certain losses, we were talking about kids. It's just like, I don't think I could handle it. And I don't think God has currently given me what I need to handle that, because I haven't lost a kid. Whereas it would obviously be the worst thing ever, but I do believe there would be something that I don't have now that God would supply if that were to happen. But were there times when you're just like, wow, like God's presence is meeting me in this pain?
100%. The Psalm 34, God is near to the brokenhearted. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. I just believed it. Like, I just knew that he was near and he was going to save me, even though I felt like I'm not going to I feel like I'm not going to survive this. I think too.
And that's a real statement. Like
Yeah.
there were times when you're like, I don't see light at the end of the tunnel.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It took 2 full years to get to the point where I believed, okay, I'm going to be okay. For 2 years after losing my dad, I thought, I'm never going to be okay. For after we lost my mother-in-law, I thought, Joe is never going to be okay. And the truth in that is I will never be the same. He will never be the same because I've never lived a life without my dad. He's never lived a life without his mom. And so we're different people because of the losses we've experienced, but we will be okay. We will survive this. And I'll never forget my best friend, Lauren. She would call me every day and talk to me and just let me cry and say the same things over and over as I was processing. And she said to me, don't forget that He is beside you. He is sad with you and for you. And that was a game changer for me to, instead of viewing God as, just this more like distant, not in the thick of it with me, God, like he was sad with me. He was sad for my loss. He was sad that I was sad. And so that's something that I really clung to, was that he's next to me as I'm walking, walking through this.
And I even think about the parables that we usually, and maybe because that's what he's talking about, I'm not sure, but we usually liken it to salvation. But you were saying that, and I'm thinking Jesus goes after the one, leaves the 99. It's like people that are grieving, Jesus is going to pursue that person and leave the 99 until that person is restored with an element of hope. I would think,
Yeah.
Could you guys maybe not relate personally with your experiences, but could you see where being in a season of grief could open doors of temptations that wouldn't necessarily be there had you not been in grief? So alcohol or, I could go on a list, I won't, but could you see how that could be more of a struggle when you're grieving because you're wanting to turn to something to fix how you're feeling?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's really normal to want to find something that something to cope.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was a lot of distracting myself, listening to podcasts, listening to books, watching movies, just like more than I normally would. Which,
that's a lot better than turning to alcohol.
No, it is for sure. But it's like something that was like out of the norm for me. And in counseling, we talked about like, okay, well, what am I running from? Like what emotions am I ignoring because I'm like trying to distract myself? And so I think it's really normal to like maybe be more susceptible or more likely to turn to something to cope.
I can't actually imagine trying to go through grief without God.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. No
like
way.
I don't really, that doesn't even make sense to me because and it's so interesting, the reactions that people have to grief. I mean, we were walking with someone through some really deep grief, and I mean, they just went off the rails, like totally turned away from God, completely like became bitter, and it's to me, it's so sad to because I know that the Lord He is hurting with that person. He does care so immensely and He wants to bring healing. But I think so many times, if we just run, we cope, we numb, we do whatever we can to just escape the pain is not going away. You're just putting a Band-Aid on it. You're never letting it actually heal. And so is it natural to cope? Of course it is. But the sooner that you choose to face the grief, even though it is the hardest thing on the planet, in my opinion, to do, it is the hardest. It doesn't get worse than that. But the sooner that you do it, the sooner that you are healed. There's no pathway around grief. You have to go straight through it. And it's your choice of whether you want to let your creator, who designed you, knows you, built you, and knows what you need, to allow him close to you to help you along the way. Going through it alone is like, to me, it's like entering a dark valley with no light.
It's such a tricky thing, especially someone who really I haven't experienced the sort of grief that you guys have. But there does seem to be like you said, you have to go through it, and then at the same time, we're speaking past tense, so we also know that there's not a finishing of it, of the process. It's kind of confusing for someone who's never gone through it, because I think there's probably some people who go to their grave having never gone through it and met it head on, and then people who have met it head on, it's not like they live the rest of their life with complete peace. There's still a hole. There's still grief there. Would you say that it's a fair statement that there's permanent damage done? And that's not to take away from what God can do, but in this life, there's permanent damage. Is that okay choice of words?
I don't like the word damage, only because it makes me think like, oh, well, now there's something like wrong with me. I think there's a permanent hole. There, there is a permanent piece that is missing that will forever be there. But I think if you, like we're talking about, if you do face your grief and process it and try to heal, it's not like you can be in a healed place. You can be in a healthy place and still have your grief, and you're not damaged from it, but there's something that is missing for sure forever.
When y'all reflect on, we talked about you're surrounded by people, and then over time people go away, and it's like a re-entry into the real world. Like, do you think of that as, outside of losing the person, that was maybe one of the toughest things, is to be like, okay, I've got to go back to my life? Like, does that stand out in your mind as like, gosh, that was hard?
Yeah, for sure. And I know it's been talked about on this podcast before how supportive this church is. And I thankfully was given time before and after the different losses we've experienced. And it was time that I needed, but then there was a time where I realized, okay, I need to go back. I need to get back into a routine. But one of the hardest things for me going back to kind of quote unquote normal was just passing by people. And what does everybody always say when they walk by you? Hey, how are you?
Right.
And I would stop in my tracks every time anybody said that, because, well, this isn't the appropriate time to tell you that I am not okay. And, all the things that I'm feeling right now, that I'm feeling 3 of the stages of grief all today. But I don't want to lie and say I'm good, because I'm not good at all.
So did you tell people the truth during that season?
I just said hi.
Yeah.
I mean, if it was,
how you doing, Keenan? Hi.
Hi. How are you?
They're like, oh, I get it. I probably shouldn't have asked it that
just
way.
kind of freeze. But I just wouldn't respond because it didn't feel like appropriate time to respond. Now then there's people who they're coming up and asking, hey, how are you? And I would be a little bit more open. But that was one of the hardest things to navigate.
Yeah.
For sure.
Would it have been not only less, and I'll use the word obtrusive, you didn't, but would it not only be less obtrusive, but also be a comfort if someone stopped you and said, hey, I just want you to know I love you and I'm praying for you, and not ask you any questions. I'm telling you I love you and I care about you and I'm thinking about you. Like, is that a game changer?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think for me, now everybody is so different. So some people may not want that. But for me, that was huge because it just made me, it was the other person acknowledging, like, I know you're not okay. I know you're in a, really hard place. And just that they cared for me. And that was huge to hear for sure.
Mm-hmm. Would y'all say y'all are, having gone through what you've been through, that you're more equipped in certain spheres of life? I mean, from an outsider, I would say, of course, it's just a matter of you've been through something that not everybody has gone through. So whether it's helping other people or, I would say that y'all are more equipped for, God forbid, a future season of grief than maybe I would be.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, grief is not, like I said, I think because it's so complex.
I'm formalizing it.
Unfortunately, I almost feel like it makes you even more fearful of grief.
Yeah.
I think, gosh, I never want to do that again.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes I think about, losing a parent or losing somebody close to me, and I'm just like, I can't.
I know what that feels like.
I don't want to do that ever. I don't. Lord, can you please just come back soon?
Yeah. Same.
Yeah, I think so. Everybody's got everybody has their own experiences. So we're all equipped for certain things, but I definitely agree that there's a little bit more fear in me that somebody close to me is gonna die.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that at least once a day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other unexpected thing is the anxiety that it brings.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think the battle with anxiety is real.
Yeah.
And so even just, anyone who's listening, I'm like, one of the things we talked about before this podcast is just, gosh, how, we want to normalize, some of the feelings that are so unexpected, or some of the reactions that your body has that's normal. Mm-hmm. It's normal to feel anxious or panicked when you're worried about somebody, or, because you have, that pain is so real and so hard. It doesn't mean that you don't trust God. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean, you know what I mean? It doesn't, it's normal. And it's all part of grieving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say you guys would probably be, outside of the Holy Spirit helping me, for instance, but y'all would be a little more equipped to walk alongside someone who's grieving, having experienced it. I would think so.
You know what's so interesting?
I don't know exactly how you feel, but I've gone through grief.
Yes. I would say yes and no. It's so interesting. In my 20s, anyone who is grieving, I would run. I felt so bad, but because the grief was still so with me, that it brought up so much grief for me that I remember having a friend who is walking through a really nasty divorce. I mean, we were in our 20s, and that's a whole different kind of grief.
Yeah.
But even that, I felt like such a terrible friend, but I just felt like I couldn't get close to pain because it was too painful for me.
Oh, wow.
But now, I feel much more equipped, because time does heal. We talked about, is it always with you? Yes. But instead of a scab, it becomes a scar.
Yeah.
It's healed. but it's still there.
Yeah.
And you have a story to tell.
Yeah.
Like you've lived through that and you've healed from it.
Right. The pain of it isn't as severe.
It's not as severe,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
There's still moments where you just out of the blue, years and years and years later,
Right.
where you're like,
severity could
whoa,
come
where
back,
did that
like,
come
yeah.
from? You know, I still and you know, there are these moments that I see as gifts from God. You know, I was telling Keenan about this dream that I had about Robbie. Robbie, like, literally was another dad to me, and we were with him, I mean, at least 4 or 5 days out of the week. So this is a person that is in my life on the
And
regular.
he passed away how long ago?
8 or 9 years ago. You know, and I had the most vivid dream that I've ever had in my whole life. And you know, the dream really quick was just basically I was walking from a parking lot into a grocery store I never, ever shopped at. But he was leaning against the wall reading the paper. He always read the paper. And he like flipped the newspaper down and was like, "Hey, girl." He would always say that to me, "Hey, girl." And I was like, oh my gosh, like what? I'm so, you know, it felt so real. And so he hugs me and we're walking through the grocery store and we're talking in real time. Like, I'm so confused. Like, wait, are you okay? And him saying, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm more than okay. And you're going to be okay too. But telling him how much we missed him. And I woke up and my pillow was soaking wet. I was just sobbing.
Wow.
But I woke up and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like that was like a visit.
Yeah.
You know, it almost felt like God allowed me to see that he was okay.
Wow.
And I don't know. I mean, I'm not like a big dream person, but I just have to believe that God does give us these like little moments that are like, hey, it's going to be okay. Like he's okay. He's more than okay. And, you know, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
You're going to get through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Flip side, and we're wrapping this thing up here. The flip side of that question, having empathy for people that are suffering. Do you think that the opposite could be true, that when people are, and this would be ugly to admit, so you guys can both lie if this is, but when someone is really down about something that you're just like, that's kind of tedious, they don't really know pain, like almost being judgmental to someone who's really upset about something that in the grand scheme of things, even that person would agree, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
I didn't lose someone. Like, is it hard not to be judgmental towards people?
I mean, I will be very honest.
Yes, please.
This is a safe space with friends.
It's just me and Lisa and the listeners.
They're in that 2 years, especially like after I lost my dad, just heavy, intense, daily grief, feeling like I was depressed. I had zero patience for hearing anyone else's issues. I would be polite and sit and listen, but in my head, I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm just being honest. This is not my heart for people. I love people.
Yeah.
And you know, it's all like perspective, right? And what you're going through, but
well, it's helpful
was
for people
so
to hear
hard.
you say that, because I'm sure some people probably feel bad about it. Like, why am I? And it's just like, gosh, you're going through a lot.
Yes.
Just give yourself grace.
Yes.
That you can't give grace right now.
Right. It was enough for me. It felt too much for me to just carry my own stuff. And so hearing anything that to me at the time seemed trivial compared to what I was going through, I had a really hard time with it, and I would process a lot of it in counseling with my counselor, because I didn't want to be ugly to anybody, of course, but I also would sit there just thinking, are you serious?
Yeah.
Are you really telling me this right now?
Right.
Like, is this your problem? I love you, but like, okay, you know, like I'm dealing with something like for me, it just feels way bigger, and I don't have the margin, like emotionally or mentally, to like give to you. Now, being a few years, beyond that time, of course, like it has changed, and I definitely have more grace going on in my brain for people like in that moment when they're sharing what they're going through.
It's a good thing to like recognize and know, like there is a season, that you need to give yourself space and grace, because there is nothing. There's no emotion or no season that is like a season of grief. And so, making big decisions, don't do it. Don't make a big decision, I would say, for a year after grieving.
Yeah, for sure.
Just because the body's natural tendency is to try to nurse a wound, to numb the pain, to get rid of it. And so it's anything that you can distract yourself with, anything that you can, buying a brand new car, or, anything that could just potentially give you that moment of like relief. It's so temporary, and there's a lot of regret, I think, sometimes when people do that. But even just knowing, like, I need some space and time. This is not the time for me to try to pastor people through something, or to, deal with family drama, or deal with, whatever. There's just, you need to give yourself that season of grace, and that season of like, I'm going to walk through this. Because the sooner I do, the sooner that I will experience some healing.
Yeah. My last question, having gone through or having lost such precious people in your life, do you think that gratitude comes a little more natural for you guys because you've experienced firsthand what's most important, because you've lost what's most important, and that's people?
Gosh, absolutely. I think honestly, like you just really get a perspective on life that's like, man, all this stuff doesn't matter. Like, it really doesn't. Like, what matters the very, very most is the precious people in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I 100% agree with that. And it's, again, like the paradox of like gratitude, and sorrow, because I even think about like my kids, like I feel like I'm even more grateful for them because of loss that we've been through. But at the same time, I look at them and they bring me such joy, and I look at them and they bring me, there's a sadness that comes because they remind me of Tammy and of my dad and their legacy. And so it feels like complicated almost to like have both of those, but it definitely makes it way easier to be grateful for them, for my family, for, my friends and all of those who have really showed up for us and like stepped in over these past few years and been there for us.
Yeah. Well, thank y'all both. I'm looking forward to enjoying the new kingdom with you guys, where death is no more.
Yes.
Where, oh, death,
Yes,
is your
Lord.
sting?
Yes.
Come on.
I
Come
love
on
that
back.
Paul mocks death. I think he's mocking them. Where, oh, death is your sting?
Yeah.
What's up?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right. Love y'all.
We love you.
Love you. Thanks, Joey.
You've been watching Seacoast Church's Things You Won't Hear on Sunday podcast. You can now become a patron of this podcast and receive exclusive content. Your support goes towards Seacoast ministry efforts and local presence. Also, be sure to leave us a review and subscribe to this podcast so that you get these episodes as soon as they're released. All of this information can be found in the show notes. Thanks for watching.